Hello, everyone, and welcome to Community Bookstore's virtual event series. My name is Hal Levinka, and I'm the event director at the bookstore, and I'm thrilled today to welcome Jer Thorp for the release of his new book, Living in Data, in conversation with Sara Hendren. While the pandemic has taken a toll across all of our lives, virtual programs like the one you're about to see have become bright spots in our days, and I want to give a huge thanks to our guests for joining us tonight. So just some housekeeping before we get started. You should be able to see and hear our presenters, but they cannot see or hear you. So if you have any questions, please click on the Q&A button here at the bottom of your screen to submit them. We'll try to get through as many of those as we can at the end of the program. There's also a chat button here through which I'll be posting a link to purchase tonight's book, very important. A caveat for tonight's event and for all virtual events, we're all at the mercy of our home internet connections and server loads, so please bear with any technical issues that might arise. We will try to solve them quickly. And finally, we've scheduled a whole host of late spring programming heading into the summer, so head over to our website and sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date. Tomorrow, we're excited to be partnering with New Directions for the release of Forrest Gander's new poetry collection, Twice Alive, in conversation with Elisa Gabbert. That program is on our website now and taking registrations. So now a little about tonight's guest, and we'll get started. Jer Thorp is an artist, a writer, and a teacher. He was the first data artist in residence at the New York Times. He's a National Geographic explorer, and he served as the innovator in residence at the Library of Congress in 2017 and 2018. He lives under the Manhattan Bridge with his family and his awesome dog, Trapper John, MD. Living in Data is his first book. And Sara Hendren is a humanist in tech, an artist, design researcher, writer, and professor at Olin College of Engineering outside Boston. Her book, What Can a Body Do? How We Meet the Built World, was named one of the best books of 2020 by NPR. Her work has been widely exhibited in museums, exhibitions, and is held in the permanent collections at MoMA and the Cooper Hewitt. She has been a national fellow at the New America think tank, a public scholar awardee from the National Endowment for the Humanities, and a Logan Nonfiction Fellow at the Carey Institute for Global Good. So, Jer and Sara, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with Jer tonight and with all of you. What a really terrific crowd. I just want to repeat again, if you want to take advantage of captions, webcaptioner.com will open in your browser and do automatic captions for tonight, because we've got a little bit of tech trouble getting the auto captions in Zoom, but welcome everyone. I'll say a few opening remarks just to welcome us here today, and then Jer will also share some remarks, and then the two of us have just some conversation topics we'll explore together, and then we'll open up the floor for your questions. So please do put them in the chat or the Q&A function, and we'll get to them. We'll be sure to spare time for whatever's on your minds. So with that, let me just say, wow, what a pleasure and honor it is to celebrate tonight's launch of Jer Thorp's Living in Data. I've known Jer for half a dozen years or so, and I've always found him to be among the best combination maker thinkers that I know. So he's someone whose questions produce things, and those things can live as questions, software and hardware, images and artifacts, and someone whose practices of making tools and things collaboratively and solo, those things in turn produce questions, ideas, and now texts, both ways, in other words, maker and thinker. Jer is an artist who walks right up to difficult issues in technology and its ethics, showing us all a way to be at play among those issues with an exploratory spirit, tinkering and testing at the foundations of what our technologies are for. That spirit of play and exploration is certainly in this book, but it packs a wallop of gravitas also, taking us through the commonly held stakes for all of us who are living in data land, and of course we all are. I think many people like me still carry around a kind of half thought out standard idea that when you make art from data, that means you're making this kind of sublime, omniscient, awe-striking image that makes order out of the many. So it forms a kind of temporary sort of comprehensiveness. There are tiny bits that are assembled as a whole, and they're arranged in a pristine kind of way. And in some way, therefore, they appear to us as knowable, that kind of data visualization. And Jer in the book calls this the kind of maybe useful, maybe dubious feeling that we get of satisfaction, that satisfaction of that order that's made out of many. But with Jer as our tour guide in this book, he comes alongside us and shows us in his own work, in the work of other artists, in the histories of data collection and its ownership and storage and its use and its misuse, just how much more interesting our collective swimming about in data really is. In the book, we travel around the world and we see data at work doing its counting and its accounting in all kinds of vividly particular places. So in the company of hippos, at the Twin Towers Memorial Site, in piles of rice, massive glaciers, walnut trees, among the Maori people in New Zealand and along the Mississippi River. So in this big raucous world of data, Jer writes, we're not so much after that satisfaction, that comprehensiveness, as of curiosity, skepticism, criticality, and optimism. And maybe above all, as he writes, again, not that satisfaction, but an earned kind of joy. And of course, joy has a bit of that longing in it, that the prospect of a desirable world. I want to read a couple of sentences from the book that distill this idea, I think, most vividly. About halfway through, Jer writes, data visualization practitioners too often adhere rigidly to best practices, scrubbing and scraping at the excesses of decoration until they hope there's nothing but the clean white bone of truth. The result of all this is that there's a kind of meal replacement logic at work, a conviction that a story in data visualization might be blended down into a neat, easily consumed slurry with all the essential vitamins and absent the pesky nuance. That none of us should miss the crisp snap of an apple's skin. But it's that skin of the apple that's here for us in the book, the sound and look and feel of data as we live it and as it lives in and through people and time and culture. It's this distinctly artist's way of looking at data that's so striking here, with an insistence on the local and the time-bound, writing against data's usual reputation for numerical anonymity. So no matter how satisfying it might be to look at data in that visualized, comprehensive way, even a comprehensively critical look at data would miss the things that this book provides. Jer makes data understandable in all its idiosyncrasy, showing us how to wrangle it with our wits intact, with our historical imagination lit up in new ways, and bringing us back from the code always to one another. So with that, I'll just say again, welcome, congratulations, Jer. So glad to be here with you and to celebrate such a worthy effort. I'll hand it over to you.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, just listening to you talk about the book. Wow, what a pleasure to hear somebody distill those thoughts down. I want to start by just giving a couple of thank yous. Well, a set of thank yous. First, to Community Bookstore, a bookstore that I've always really loved. Two of my favorite words together in a name. So thanks for hosting the event tonight. And I hope everybody does. If you haven't bought the book already, buy the book from Community Bookstore. And if you have bought the book already, you can buy another copy of the book from Community Bookstore. I want to thank MCD, my publisher, Sean McDonald, and the whole team there who kind of made the book into a real thing. Rodrigo Corral, who designed this kind of amazingly wonderful book jacket, and Andrew Kuo, whose painting is on the front. My agent, Jeff Shreve, who kind of made this thing into a reality when it was not at all a reality. I wrote about this a little bit on Twitter, but this book has been really nothing more than a folder on my desktop for most of a decade. And Jeff sort of pushed me and prodded me into making it a real thing. So Jeff, thank you. My partner, Nora, who's the book is dedicated to, there was no choice about who the book would be dedicated to, has been super supportive in this whole process. And, I was thinking about this when I was writing the thank yous so I grew up in a suburb of Vancouver called Tsawwassen, and in our basement, we had it was a Mac SE connected to a modem, and a whole bunch of aquariums. There was 2 floor looms, and there's a box of old punch cards that we used to use as scrap paper for drawing. And I think the entirety of my career, and the entirety of that book is encoded in those items. So of course, a big thank you to my mom and my dad and my brother for kind of making this thing what it was. And Sara, thank you so much for being the person to bring this thing into the world tonight. If you all have not read Sara's book, you need to read Sara's book. I was at a point of I don't know if crisis is the appropriate word, but we can use it. I was at kind of a point of crisis in my own writing of the book when your book came out, and just reading it gave me a kind of conviction that I could do the thing that I was setting out to do, and I will always be grateful to you for that. I had an idea that I was going to sort of start this off by telling a story, and I had a keynote kind of presentation to walk through, but I went out for a walk today, just right before this, and in the park, I live next to Brooklyn Bridge Park. They were pulling out these weeds all day. So there was these big piles of these weeds, and they're these sticky weeds that kind of cling to your clothing. These ones are called bed straw, but the type of a weed is called a hitchhiker weed. It's something that is designed to stick to you. And this book is built upon a whole bunch of hitchhiker weeds that have stuck to me for a decade. And I think the central exercise of it was to sit kind of patiently and pick those things out of my socks and look at them closely. And that process, if there are anybody who's ever picked birds, you think you have all of them, and then you start walking and there's still another one in your shoe, and there's like then another one and another one and another one. And this book was really about addressing those and kind of figuring out why they've been so sticky to me. And so I thought, instead of doing a presentation, I'm going to read, and I'm going to read the prologue to the book, which is all about this particularly sticky person for me, who is a geologist named Harold Fisk. His friends called him Hal. So I'll just read for you. Hal Fisk stood in the Louisiana sun, wiping the sweat from his brow with a clean white handkerchief. It was one of a few dozen that Emma always packed for him on these trips, for the sweat and for the mud. There was mud still in the deep furrows of his geologist's hands, even after he'd wiped them clean and then wiped them clean again. There was mud too, caked and dried up both of Hal's arms, to where he'd rolled up his shirt sleeves neatly in the morning. To do any sort of work out here was to be very intimate with mud, no way around it. They'd been trying to get the bore rig starting all morning, but the big bit kept on getting caught on something before it built up enough torque. An old tree root, it turned out, so Bill Hendy was neck deep in the muck with a hacksaw trying to get the thing out. Hal hoped they could get the machine started soon. Around noontime, the heat would get downright unbearable. This was the second last drill between Harrisburg and Natchez, and he was eager to get back to Vicksburg, to Emma, to the lab, and to the data. Where Hal was standing was a good 10 miles from the Mississippi. There was another river that ran much closer by, the Tensas. It was a stream, really, choked with turtle grass, half decent for fishing according to the locals, but barely wide enough for a boat even after the rain. What the mud would tell them, Hal knew, was that the Tensas was the meandering ghost of a Mississippi past, a last trickle of a course abandoned some 3,000 years before. It had been clear from the beginning to the first humans who had navigated the river that the Mississippi was restless. Over time, its curves would widen, the water becoming more shallow. Eventually, the elbows of the river would double back on themselves, and the water, taking what it deemed to be the most rational path, would decide to avoid the old part altogether, would flow across the ground to the next loop of the river, cutting off a piece of itself, and repeat. Evidence of this bending and rebending lives in the mud and in the life that sprang from it. A cut-off elbow of the river might spend a century or two as a stranded lake. During this time, it discards its riverine identity and becomes a closed system, something more still. Long-nosed gar and quick silvery dace are replaced by slow-moving bass and deep burrowing catfish. At the water's edges, new plants arrive, more suited to the idle water of the lake. Year to year, decade to decade, they send their roots into the water to drink, and the soil builds around them. It is a drawn-out argument between land and water, won before it began. The water is consumed, and what is left is a lake-shaped mark of greenery, growing on top of a lake-shaped layer of mud. From the sample they'd drawn today, and some 16,000 others, Hal and his team would reconstruct the river as it was. Some of the boreholes that the team drilled reached down more than 13,000 feet into the earth, and the rock there held evidence of the river's beginnings from the last great ice age, some 2.5 million years ago. From the mud and the rock and the aerial photographs, they would draft maps of each of the river's abandoned curves, stacking on top of each other, a record of huge, timeless, writhing thing. The result was a report delivered in 1944, titled The Geological Investigation of the Alluvial Valley of the Lower Mississippi River. From all these columns of earth and images from airplanes, they built an epic geological story, one more complete than had ever been told. In the report, you can read of roaring glacial runoffs, of boulders carried across continents, of the sunflower system, of Thebe's Gap, the Walnut Bayou segment, the Gulf Coast geosyncline, of bed materials and bank recession and salt domes and uplifts. Fisk's work was a gargantuan feat of data collection, of synthesis and map making. From mud and patchwork photographs, he gave the river, with its school rhyme name, a 170-page origin story of a place, of a landscape, of a way of life. There were 200 copies of Fisk's report printed, and for $2.50 plus postage, it'd be delivered to you, a compact book printed on white paper, and 26 map plates neatly folded into quarters and tucked into a brown paper envelope. One of those copies ended up at the New York Public Library, and a few months back, I went to the main branch in Bryant Park to visit it. Even though I'd seen images of the maps many times, when I unfolded the first plate onto one of the reading room's broad wooden tables, my heart skipped a beat. The maps are gorgeous, visceral things, rendered in a brilliant color palette of green and yellow and orange and red. And they are big. I could fit only 4 plates on a time at a time on the 20-foot long table. To see the whole set of maps in one place, you'd need a hallway 108 feet long. Seeing that I was trying to get a photograph of the maps from above, one of the librarians brought out a stepladder, and I climbed to the top. It might have been vertigo. I'm not very good with heights, but a kind of dizziness overtook me as I looked down onto the 4 plates, onto a stretch of the river that spanned 2,400 miles and 10,000 years. For a moment, I saw a map of this book that you have in front of you, and I realized that the story I have to tell, too, is one of meanderings, of swift currents and slow corners, of silt and history. It's a story that has come to me in part by looking down from above, watching and listening and reading, spending hours in archives. Mostly, though, it has come from time spent waist deep in data, in research labs at the New York Times and the Library of Congress, on expedition with National Geographic field teams, in the galleries in the Museum of Modern Art, at the bottom of the ocean, in cities like Calgary and St. Louis and Manchester, and in the middle of Times Square. There is mud on my hands. There are 164 rivers that join the Mississippi along its 2,000-mile course from Lake Itasca to the Gulf of Mexico. The Languille, the Skokie, the Edwards, the Grant, the Iowa, the Missouri, West Branch Sugar River and Hay Creek and Bayou Pierre. The biggest of these have their own tributaries, so to consider the river is to stretch from Montana to Pennsylvania, from Saskatchewan to New Orleans. Read about data in the newspaper, read about it online, and it might fool you. It might fool you into believing that the path we're on is a predetermined one, that the way in which we are being carried along its course is the only way we can go, that its history could be drawn in one clean line. To tell the real story of data, though, is to speak not only of the big topics, of Facebook and machine learning and targeted advertising and visualization and facial recognition. To get the whole picture, we need to visit the smallest creeks and the brooks and streams, the places where the story bubbled up a century ago, and the places where we can find new stories just beginning to flow. Helen Hall Jennings sits in a classroom in Brooklyn in 1931, watching the students writing in her notebook. A 17-year-old in Cleveland dials into the nation's largest free net. Outside a school in San Francisco in 1999, children plant 2 walnut saplings, identical clones. In a theater in Birmingham in 2003, a woman is on her hands and knees, carefully counting out 2,435 grains of rice. In the highlands of Angola in 2015, a convoy of mine-clearing vehicles rumbles through a pristine forest. On the north side of St. Louis, a group of 9th graders projects census data onto a hand-drawn map. On a glacier in the Canadian Rockies, a sensor records a sudden movement of the ice. There is no straight line to be drawn between these heres and theirs, these nows and thens. This book will, by necessity, meander. It will double back and reverse course. Step back, though, climb up onto a ladder, and I hope you'll see a bigger story.
So good, thank you. Well, so Jer, why don't I just throw some questions your way to
Sure.
take in whatever direction. Let's just chat. We've got good time here.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so, and I see a little bit of echo in this kind of coming through in some of the questions too. But so the book includes, and you've sort of demonstrated it there with that reading, a mix of reportage and ideas in our tour through understanding data as it shows up in our lives. But it also includes a couple of short fiction passages, and then there are these artworks that are printed as graphics in between chapters. And neither of those elements, the fiction or the graphics, are like illustrations. They're not like utilitarian features of the book. They have this kind of poetic function. And I wonder if you can talk about some of those decisions in the structure of the book.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll start with the visualizations. So there are 17 graphics in the book. 14 of them are visualizations. 12 of them are new for the book. And something happened to me when I worked at the New York Times 10 years ago. And it's funny for me to put it this way, but I started to feel a little sorry for data, like because of the burdens that we put on it, like that it must kind of do a specific thing. And that kind of sympathy. Also, I also attached to data visualization that it sort of must. There's a lot of musts in data viz, and I actually write about that in chapter 8. Like if you sit down with all the kind of standard texts of data visualization, they almost all start with this actually often directly religious context of the ways in which we must we must work with data, and so the visualizations, I think of them as epigraphs to the chapters. So in the same way that a kind of quote as an epigraph is meant to evoke something, these graphics are meant to evoke something. And rarely do they directly address like something in the chapter, but I want them to set a tone. And that's not to say that they don't contain a lot of information. And I spent a lot of time on several of them, a lot of time kind of researching and pulling in information, but I wanted them, to be able to exist kind of on their own, as well as being, they're not illustrations to the chapters. They're their own thing. So I'm actually very interested to hear what people think about them. There is a GitHub repository. This is when I say like the most shameful thing that I have to say this whole time, which is that every one of those URLs that I put in for the GitHub repository, they're all wrong. But if you go to the main repository, which is GitHub/blueprint/LID, you'll find everything there. Anyways,
Jer, I see in the chat that somebody's asking whether you might have an example of one of those ready to hand that you might screen share. Is that something that's easy to do? Do you want to have one, or?
That's a good question. I mean, yes. Okay, I'll find it. Since somebody asked, we'll find it.
And they are beautiful.
Yeah, and you know I can't talk and go through a folder at the same time.
Yeah, and I don't want to, if it's going to be too much of a dig. I mean, Douglas, that's very nice,
because they are literally all right here.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's do this one.
And while you do that, I happen to have the must page open. Oh, go ahead. You're there.
Yeah, so this graphic is the lead-in to a chapter about Indigenous data sovereignty, which I realized that when I was thinking about this book that I'd gotten kind of most of the way through, and I didn't have a lot of really good tangible examples that kind of put the ideas to work from the book. And at around that same time, I stumbled on the work that was happening in New Zealand, the Maori Indigenous data sovereignty work, an organization called Te Mana Raranga. And I decided that I would fly out to New Zealand and go talk to them because it was so intriguing to me. And then when I was thinking about what the graphic was going to be, I don't know how many people know about this website called nativeland.ca, but it's a really amazing native-land.ca. It's a really amazing resource where you can go and see what the ancestral Indigenous territory is that you're currently on or that you might currently be going to. And when I looked at that site and thought also about the themes of the project, I decided to build this visualization, which shows the Indigenous territories on which every one of the sort of big four's data centers sit. I don't know how familiar people are with the general concept of data sovereignty, but data sovereignty means essentially that the data is bound by the rules in the physical place that it lives. And this has become quite interesting. So in the wake of the Snowden revelations, for example, the Canadian government was trying to convince companies to be able to kind of move their data, the personally identifiable data to Canadian servers, such that the Canadian government would sort of allow its citizens to have control over it under Canadian law. And Indigenous data sovereignty is a little different than that. It sort of says that any data that is connected about Indigenous people or by Indigenous people or about their lands and territories and sort of sacred objects is a sort of sovereign property of, and property is not the right word, but is bound by these sort of rules of data sovereignty. So the idea of this graphic was to sort of think about what that would mean, because companies like Google and Facebook, they benefit from the concept of data sovereignty, but they wouldn't benefit if we were to take it one step further and kind of put it into this context. So yeah, I hope that's a good example. All these graphics look better in print. They did a really beautiful job of the book in 2-color, and I hope people will dig into each one of them.
Yeah, and then just to take us back, I mean, you were saying that, right, they're not illustrations, they're meant to do something. I mean, do you remember, and I do want to hear your thoughts about including fiction, but I just wonder, like, all the names of those have these very poetic, idiosyncratic, I mean, they're sort of artwork names, even sort of elegy-esque sort of names in some cases. And do you remember the first time you thought, like, oh, what happens when you take a numerical, production and you assign it this kind of prose poetry name? And what do you remember? Because I was just struck by.
I don't remember when that happened, but I remember that I had placeholder names for all of these, and none of them were very appealing. And actually, the one that started the naming process was where is it? Was this one? So this is a visualization of. Actually, it's a screenshot from a tool that I made when I was trying to write about the linguistic relationships between the word data and other words, and so I built this kind of sketch that allowed me to look at how words are positioned in space related to data, and I just loved the way that it looked, and it's kind of more or less kind of straight out of that tool that I made. Which actually was made first at the Library of Congress, and it was made as a tool to generate poetry. So kind of it's lived a bunch of lives. But what I did with this one was I took a whole bunch of text from the New York Times and looked at how data was the context of the word data was changing, and most specifically, like what words were moving closer to data and which words were moving further apart. And I couldn't think of a title for this, and then I was just reading the first page of the the chapter, and I came up with this phrase, and it just really stuck. And so I put that in there, and I realized I had to do the same thing for the rest of them. And so yeah, there's these. This is like one of my favorite ones, and yeah, that sort of, I think, played with this idea was to. I didn't want to put too much utility in their titles. I wanted to let people sort of understand a little bit about what was happening.
Yeah, and they have that.
Yeah, this graphic is one of my favorite ones out of the book, and I think maybe it serves the purpose that we were talking about more than maybe any of the others, because it's the end of the chapter, which talks about the work in St. Louis, which in many ways was born out of Michael Brown's killing, and sort of how that impacted me as an artist who'd been asked to kind of come into St. Louis and work in the community. And so this is the last graphic, which kind of imagines like that if events had turned out differently and Michael Brown had not been shot, sort of what that warm day might have held for him, that he might have just kept on walking and ended up at any of these green spaces and parks in the city. And it was, yeah, I wanted it to feel a little bit like an elegy.
Yeah. So you want to say a couple of words about the use of fiction? I mean,
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
It's so the reason why the fiction thing, the thing started was with the section that I read to you. I mean, it happened in 1931, and I started writing it very clinically, where it was like, a historical recollection, and it just didn't feel like what I wanted to start the book with. And so I turned it into this sort of try to bring the reader into what that looked like. And it, out of necessity, I had to make a lot of it up because that's not really documented very well. And so I did like as best as I can to kind of make it feel historically accurate, but it's historical fiction.
Yeah.
And then when I got to the end of the book, I wrote the second last chapter the way that it kind of sits, and it just didn't feel like the book was finished to me. And so I woke up one morning with this idea for a story that would happen also near the Mississippi, and I wrote it. And you probably have had this experience where you like send something to your editor and you're like, let's give this a try. And that was really one of those things. Like I kind of 90% expected that they'd be like, the manuscript, these are the things we need to do, but can we get rid of that weird fiction part at the end, because it doesn't really work. But I love it, and I it's really resonated with me. I never thought that I would write a nonfiction book. I don't read nonfiction much. I've only really ever, if you looked at my pie chart, sorry, database people, my pie chart of reading, like you would barely see the slice that is nonfiction. And so it's instinctive to me as a writer to sort of think in fictional structures, but I didn't think I was actually going to write fiction for this book. And so I snuck that in there. And yeah, I'm really eager to hear what people think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it works, and it has that same quality of the suggestive and the speculative, along with some of these images that are kind of presented right for the reader to just make what they will. Really interesting. Let me move to another question. So I feel like you've achieved a voice in the book that has kind of the teacher in it, like without a hint of paternalism. I felt like there were lots of kind of technical terms and histories and things that I was unaware of, but I was being led, this is a sort of accompaniment through that. So it's an introductory way for the beginner to data, but it also, your voice also includes the critic, and you grapple with, the sort of the biggest issues that people are wondering about, privacy and surveillance and so on. And it includes, moreover, in addition to those voices, the teacher and the critic, I feel like it includes the kind of restless agency of the builder, so the maker, the artist, or the engineer. And we drop in on you throughout the book at certain times as a practitioner in some of these builder tasks. So sometimes you're making a point for us, and then sometimes you're just situating us in a place. So if you take, for example, your time as innovator in residence, which was like a first time job, for the Library of Congress that was created kind of for you, but, and all of the contingency that had to come with that. I mean, nobody had done that before. They weren't sure what they wanted. But so you're being there at play with information without like a real set of directives. Just that positionality, I think, indicates something that's more than critique of data's misuse that's in many of your passages. So, and you tour us through, again, the projects of other artists, the rice and trees and all the ways that those make sense of data. But you're walking us through how that same exploratory spirit plays out. And I feel like you're trying to talk to us about the contingency of the future. It's a kind of invitation even to other builders.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about how you balance that critical voice with that kind of provisional hope that's there too.
Yeah, I mean, I love both of those phrases that you said, this idea of an invitation to the builder and this idea also of like a contingency for the future. And I think that second thing I'm laying out pretty directly, and especially in the last part of the book, right? That the urgency to me to write this book is that we need a different data future, right? We need one. It has to happen. And I think that there has been a lot of discussion about policy change and like lobbying and not a lot of discussion about like how do we make that future. And that's not to say that I think there's a hopeful many sort of projects that are setting a tone, but I wanted to center some of those in the book, and then also, yeah, it is an invitation. It's an invitation to people who are data people to do different things that might help us, blaze that trail. When I was a kid, I thought when I closed my eyes and thought about trailblazing, I thought they were like lighting something on fire, and it wasn't like until I became a hiker that it was like this really kind of delicate act of like tying a brightly colored cloth to like show the way. And I love that idea of trailblazing, right? This idea of setting out some possible paths for people. And that is 100% what I want people to be doing. And then I also hope that the book provides a lot of ideas about how you might do that if you had no technical expertise and actually don't consider yourself to be a data person at all. The Rice Show, which James always doesn't like me to use that term because it's called Of All the People in All the World, which is this really great title. But they call it, they gave it the nickname The Rice Show, and so I'll call it The Rice Show. But that's a great example to me. I think it's this tremendously impactful project that speaks directly to some of the challenges that we have around data and data communication, but it's done by a theater group, and its technology involves a whole bunch of rice and a scale. That's it.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to under exaggerate. I don't want to. It's an amazing piece, and it involves choreography and staging and costume and all these amazing things. But yeah, that was something that I really did want to say. And I have a high school diploma. I actually don't have my high school diploma because I owed library fines and I couldn't get a copy of it. But I earned a high school diploma, but I don't really have anything past then. So, my sort of 10 years of scholarship in data has been about making and has been, because that's what I can do. That is the thing that I can do. And so, that book really follows the process of making, which started with just pretty straightforward data visualization and has never ended, but has moved into these, I think, very different ways of examining data and our relationship to it.
It's funny. I know you and I are both George Saunders fans, and I've heard him say, and I've thought about this a lot. He says oftentimes, like, if you find a weakness in your, whatever, your preparation, your training, your craft or technique, and sometimes if you burrow deep inside that weakness, it can actually come out the other end and flower as voice, as point of view, So like you sort of state normatively, like, well, I don't, my scholarship was the making because that's what I know how to do. But of course, over time, what that accretes and aggregates to become is a kind of point of view. And I would like to suggest that, in fact, that agency of the builder eludes folks in scholarship sometimes in ways that they're aware of. Each of us has a post respective to our subject matter, and we need those critical projects, but we also need these kind of agency and builder projects in the form of text, So I would say it's happenstance and also then at some point on purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, and the writing of the book was a deliberate submergence into that. I knew that in order to write this book, that I did have to get into critical data studies, which is a field that I'm at the edge of more deeply, such that the things that I was saying were founded, but also such that other people's ideas came into it in, I think, really interesting ways. And I think, when I started to set out writing the book, the very first thing I did was sit down and interview some people who I knew I wanted to hear from, and who I think could like speak better of a point that I wanted to bring in the book, like Mimi Onuoha, who was the first person I interviewed for this book, because I wanted to talk about the things that are not collected and what that means. And I think I could speak on that topic pretty well, but I know that she does it better than I do. And so that's like I sat down and had this discussion with her, and that ended up really informing the way that the second chapter of the book was written.
Yeah, and Mimi's another maker, thinker, I mean, extraordinaire. I see that Yanni Luki says, hi, Yanni, is saying, can we stop screen sharing?
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
No, it's all
you guys
good.
don't all want to stare at that graphic for.
So we have so many good questions from folks, and I want to make sure to get to them. And I think I'm going to go to that because I may have some follow-ons to some.
Fine.
I just want to respect people's wonderful kinds of queries here.
Sarah, we've never had trouble filling conversations.
Exactly. If anything, I'm worried I'm going to be like blah blah blah. So I wonder if you could talk about how your work as a teacher makes its way into your writing on data. This is from an anonymous attendee. Thanks for that question. So where, and I do think the voice of the teacher is here, but you do tell us, where is that coming from? Or
well, yeah, that's a great. So I've been teaching for a long time. I started teaching as a job in 1999. So 22 years of it, and yeah, I started like fairly early on. Well, I got pushed into the pool. So in 1999, I was working at the Vancouver Aquarium. I just dropped out of university, and a friend of mine joined a .com company, and they were hiring people to be Flash developers. I didn't actually know what Flash was, but I'd done a little bit of programming as a kid, so I spent a weekend kind of looking at what Flash was, and I made this really silly Flash resume, and I sent it to them, and I got hired. I didn't really know what I was doing. And then shortly after I got hired, this person asked me to come teach a class on it at a college. It's I didn't really know what I was doing. And that started me down a trend, which I still do, which is teach to learn. And so for me, the process of kind of putting together a syllabus and preparing a lecture, but also having a conversation with people is the way that I come to understand something. Yeah. And so certainly a lot of the ways that I talk about the ideas in this book have come from that, right? Have come from, so I've been teaching at ITP and NYU for 10 years, and all of my classes in some way have been about data. And so I've had to speak about these ideas to my students kind of over and over again. And it's definitely not a one-way street. The things that those students come back to me with have really molded the way that I think and talk. So there's very much me, the teacher, in this book, and then there's me, the practitioner. And those things have always been very deeply entangled. And I don't really know where one starts and the other one stops, because similar to the book and to my practice, my teaching is also about kind of we make things together and try to figure out some of these opportunities, these pieces of tension that I think are just fun places to explore.
Totally. It reminds me, my friend Kevin Hamilton, who's at Urbana-Champaign, says that when he's actually learning a new software program for students, he models learning it in front of them on purpose. He's precisely performing the learning of the new thing, just to keep saying to them, if you want to figure out what you want to do, you learn your whole life. I'm not going to stand up here and pretend as though, I knew this already. I thought that was really wonderful. So Jay Ruiz is asking, could you talk a little bit about the fiction and film that you think is approaching data in a forward-thinking way? So are there kind of
Oh, wow.
narrative expression of sort of data
Oh my
relationship?
gosh, that is an amazing question. That's a really good question.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think about an answer. I'm not sure that I that I have an answer to that right away. Maybe.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that may work in the back of your mind, and I can move
Yeah,
on.
it's going to work in the back of my mind, and
Sure.
I will like, there will an answer will come out of it.
I bet.
And I just don't know when.
I'll send that one back to your,
Yeah.
Okay.
There are pieces of fiction that really found their way into my thinking about the book, and into the way that it exists in my head, and into my work. And one of those books is a Jose Saramago book called All the Names, which is set in the city archive. And that book defines so much about the way that I think about those places and those things. And that's a good idea. I'm gonna make a reading list because I think there's what I was hoping for to answer that question was one, oh yeah, this and this, but I think it's more like a lot of things that have given me pieces of it. And actually I do have a reading list that informed the book, and there's quite a few fiction works in there that kind of really worked for me. So I will definitely.
And Hal from Community Bookstore is saying you can make a list, and when they do the recording, they can add that to the list.
Yeah, great. I love that. I was excited about that exercise.
So Maggie Sale is asking, is saying that they picked up their copy yesterday and are loving it. Can you speak to how you worked out a cohesive narrative flow to essentially a book about the pieces that make up the world? Like how do you make that hang together?
Oh, how did I do it, Sarah? How did we do it? I don't.
walking.
Yeah, I think walking. Sarah and I spent some time at this residency together, and I think a lot of the other people in residence would kind of wonder what I was doing, because I would leave first thing in the morning and come back late in the afternoon, having done nothing but walk all day, and that was sort of how things settled themselves into my brain. But so I wrote a few of the chapters first, and then there would be this kind of connective tissue that had to happen. But maybe just sort of speak generally about the structure of the book, and maybe something that people who have the book haven't noticed. But there's the kind of a symmetry in the book. So in the middle, there's a piece called an interlude, which is all about this trip that I made to the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico in the submarine that discovered the Titanic, called Alvin. And sorry, I'm trying to find it in here now. Give me 1 second.
Sure.
And you'll notice that sort of there's like two dark pages before the interlude, and then if you go past the interlude, there's two like slightly lighter pages afterwards. And if you pay attention to that, you'll see that actually these red pages, they start very dark and they end very light. And there's a structure in the book that I was interested in exploring, where the beginning is sort of doing some kind of setting of the ground, but also kind of telling some bad news. Like this is a lot of the complications of data and the way that we have not found ground as citizens in it. And then the second half of the book kind of tries to take us out of it. And it's not as neat as that, but there was once I settled on that structure, things came a little bit easier. And yeah, I had a giant Post-it wall, and I would move things around, and there's lots of points where it didn't feel like it would ever come together, because it is sort of these chapters live on their own.
Yeah.
And that they need to string together. And in some ways, sometimes it felt like I was never going to find that way. And then I would be like, that's the thing. Coming back to what we talked about in the beginning with those burrs, I would like find another one and I'd be like, oh, that's it. That's the one that brings these things together.
Fantastic. All right. So many good questions. So I'm going to read one from Jennifer Gardy.
Hi, Jennifer.
Yeah, Jen says, Jer, it's Jen Gardy. I'm halfway through the book already, and I keep thinking how all my global health data colleagues need to read your words and to think about how we, as people who have a fair amount of influence on the nature of data collection, can put your guidance into action. My question, Jen writes, is how do you see some of the principles you set forth in the book, like no datafication without representation, rolling out in more structured environments, like in the context of a Ministry of Health collating routine epidemiological data? Can we adapt these principles to rigid governmental health information system standards, or do we get revolutionary and look to inspire revolution in the systems themselves? Do we do both?
Revolution, obviously, that's the answer. I speak in one of the chapters to Nathaniel Raymond, who tells this really interesting story about a big, very well-funded project that he'd been working on, actually funded by George Clooney, which he sort of decided one day that they weren't going to do anymore for this reason that they couldn't with any confidence say that they weren't putting people at more risk by doing this operation than they were by not doing it. And sort of out of that, which I mentioned briefly in the book, came a series of principles which they call the signal code, which is kind of you can think of as a human rights structure for data. And so that is a peek at kind of what these ideas, which certainly are not all my own, these ideas can be instrumentalized. But I think there is also just a principle. I mean, I think we can think about organizations having guidelines and frameworks and so on, but above those are principles. And to me, that no datafication without representation is a principle that needs to be followed. And they're not necessarily kind of a point-by-point instruction of what that looks like. And to me, maybe even more so is this idea of data, like closing that data loop and bringing the data back to the people from whom the data is being collected. And that is an exercise that needs to happen more and more and more and more and more and more. And all of us experience this, where data is being collected to us, but not returned to us in a meaningful way. I mean, I think the census is a great example of this, right? Like the census data is collected from all of us. We have this legal burden to fill it out. And we certainly we feel a return from it in the way that we lose seats or that funding changes in our municipal level. And if you know how to access census data, then you can get some sort of information out of it. But on a neighborhood level, there's no meaningful way in which the census comes back to me, right? Which I find kind of, it's like, we're like shouting into the wind and nothing is coming back. And I think there's a necessity to be doing that. And if there is a sense in your mind that is like, well, we can't really do that because the people wouldn't really understand it, then you're doing your job wrong. Like it needs to be meaningful. And if it isn't meaningful to the people whom you're collecting data from, then something needs to change. And those are huge questions about literacy and about the modes of communication and so on.
Yeah, translational work, and goodness, so much. Thank you. Okay, so we have another anonymous attendee who is posing two questions. One, how do we square the kinds of data accumulation and generation that is potentially damaging to the world? Let's say the blockchain's effects on climate change, and the sense of progress that is attached to our relationship with data. So squaring those two things.
Yeah.
I mean, squaring or something, reckoning. So that's number one. And then two, as an artist, what are your feelings about NFTs and data arts, so art in quotes, relationship to capital?
Whew.
Yeah.
How long do we have to answer those two
Yeah,
questions?
seriously. So
okay. Well, yeah, with interest in time, I'll do a succinct answer to both of them. There's a diagram that all of us who have ever gone to a talk about data have seen, which is the data, information, knowledge, wisdom triangle. And it sort of looks like this. And at the bottom is data, and we kind of go up to wisdom. And if there were a tattoo that the data industry would get, it would be that, right? And because its underlying ethos is that we must collect enough data to drive sort of wisdom, which is that common good. And yeah, I think what the diagram ignores is this idea that collection in itself can be a risk and a harm. And I write a little bit about in the book, which is an idea that I'd sort of thought about before, but is elucidated a little bit more beautifully by a group of Maori scholars who talk about the idea of a Maori data prism, in which the wisdom sort of is the thing that is first. And the wisdom is what sort of drives us to decide about what gets collected for who and why. And I think that sort of underlying idea that we should tolerate data collection because it's sort of in the progress of a greater good is hugely problematic. It's the core, it is the master narrative of data, right? The master narrative is about a benevolent collector. And that is the problem. We need to discard this idea of the benevolent collector, because that's not really a thing. And we have to understand how we writ large, and I use that word we in all kinds of problematic contexts, but can take that role. So that's a rambling answer to the first question. And then, the second question, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on about NFTs because I feel like the whole internet has been talking about it for the last few months. The thing that I want to underscore to everybody, though, is that there are kind of two big things happening in the tech art movement right now. And one of them is NFTs, and the other is this amazing sort of trying to understand how concepts of mutual aid, how environmental responsibility, how kindness and all these things can play a louder role in our work than it has in the past. And that to me is hugely exciting, but we're not seeing stories written about it because it's not as interesting. So what I would ask is just that people maybe go out of your way to find these other things that are happening, because I think they are astounding and they give me a huge amount of hope.
Yeah, right on. And just to underscore, I can't resist the professor at an engineering school in me can't resist the prism, starts with wisdom traditions. Those belong in the humanities. I mean, it's such a kind of mechanistic engineering idea that you build a pyramid by which naturally the moreness of more will yield the knowledge, which will what? You turn a crank and you get wise? Yeah. I mean, what is this idea?
It is, right? It's like it's a perpetual motion machine that doesn't make any sense. And
right.
And then there's also this idea that the way that those systems exist, they exclude the people who we know actually hold wisdom.
Right. Exactly.
You think specifically about the elderly and like those are people who are deliberately excluded from these systems. And so what are we doing? It doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so much to say there. Okay, I want to move to Denise Ross, who says, "Hi, Jer.
Hey.
I spent years wrangling data to track the recovery of New Orleans post-Katrina, and now work on data tracking the recovery from the COVID crisis.
Yeah.
A theme in both situations is crucial data that are missing. Today, for example, we don't have good numbers on how many children are not enrolled in school. Curious how you perceive the negative space of missing data, the people and phenomena that are statistically invisible." Of course,
well, I mean, there's a whole chapter in the book about this, and it sort of borrows a term from Simone Brown. It's called "Data's Dark Matter," and one of the very first things that I tell my students is to, when you look at a data set, is to ask the question about what isn't there, right? And that answer is as important as what is there, because what is and what isn't there or are not there for reasons, right? And actually Mimi does a great job in that chapter of elucidating the kind of various different reasons we have for that. You know, I had this really personal experience when I was in St. Louis doing the map room, where you know, so the book is in some ways a kind of charting of my own like naive mistakes with data and how I've kind of learned from them. And we came to St. Louis with this idea that we would build this space and we would get people to draw maps of their lived experience, and then we would project civic data on top of it. And that civic data would like give people new ways to see their neighborhoods, and they would collaborate in interesting ways and blah, blah, blah. And of course, what we saw as soon as we started doing it was that the people who lived in these places saw how the data was wrong, right? And saw what was missing in a way that can only be seen from that perspective. And you know, we started describing the map room as exactly that, as a kind of machine to occupy other perspectives, because you can like look at a map that was made by 7th grade students and then project data upon it, and you have this concept. You can't help but think about that as a 7th grade student because of the way the marks have been made and so on and so on. So I feel like we need better mechanisms for that. You know, we need better ways to, and this comes to this trickles right off our last question, to engage those missing voices, right? So we have missing data, and then you have missing voices. And we have not done a very good job of that. And I think part of that is because we are so embedded in certain ways of telling stories and certain ways of delivering narrative that like they maybe not so effective. And so like thinking about community spaces and publics is really important. And that you know, I think about the Rice show. Again, I'm going to say the wrong name again. The reason why it's so evocative to me is that I could imagine a future in which there were like a part of government that looked something like that, you know, that isn't quite a library and isn't quite public television, isn't quite, you know, public theater, but has some elements of all of those things that would be a kind of space and like a framework for people to be able to engage with these things that are very important to engage with.
We're at 8:30. I want to just acknowledge that, but if people want to stay for a little bit longer, we have a little wiggle room, I'm told, by Community Bookstore. So I do want to pose there just a couple more questions here.
Yeah, let's wiggle.
Yeah, one of which is kind of craft oriented, and then one which is back in the realm of the philosophical. So let me just ask you the kind of project manuscript question from Josh Greenberg. What's your favorite thing that didn't make it into the final manuscript?
Oh, okay. So I use this program called Scrivener, which I love, by the way. I could definitely, like, if Scrivener's looking for like a sponsored writer, I'm in. And I had these, every chapter had a like accompanying file that I called clippings, and I used the little scissor icon, and I would like, you know, drop things in and out of it, and lots of stuff went in and out, and it like kind of made that navigation. And now I'm trying to like, I have a hard time with favorite, because there's like a reason why these things like ended up not being in there. I wrote quite a long section about one of my favorite visualizations, which I'm a big comic nerd. Like when I grew up, there was like 3 things that I was obsessed with as a 13-year-old. It was like Apple computers and Marvel comics and tropical fish. And like 2 of those things became like these defining, amazing things, parts of our culture. And, you know, so far the neon tetra has not made it. But I made this visualization of the history of the Avengers. And I wrote like quite a long section about that graphic because I love it so much. But then it just didn't fit with the rest of the chapter. And yeah, so I love that graphic, and I love that story, and I wish it could, maybe it'll come out of it somehow. You know, I think I made this big box, this idea came from you, about this big box with index cards. And yes. So I have like this pile of research around this book that hopefully later down the road when I'm doing other writing projects, I'll be able to like sort through and find these pieces that just didn't make it in, didn't get in there.
And I got that from Ryan Holiday. If you're a weary creative person trying to just keep a bunch of things kind of in the hopper, that index card method. If you Google Ryan Holiday index card, I highly recommend it.
That's so good.
Yeah, right. Okay, so last question we've got is from Steve Morin, and Steve says,
"Hey, Steve,
I'm an engineer. Data is the oracle I use to try and predict the future with all the religious connotations of visiting Delphi. How is that different from how you see data?"
Yeah, well, I mean, so I write in the second chapter, which is all about the word data, it is where the word data came from, right? It's a loan word from Latin, and it was used in a theological context. So the idea was like data was something that was given. So that's the root of the word, from God. And I do think there is an issue in sciences and engineering of that kind of understanding of data, because to me, data in every case is an artifact of a human measurement. And I think we do a good, part of an engineer's job is to make sure that artifact is as close to the real thing as it possibly can be. But they're never going to be the same thing. It's sort of a map in the territory question there. It's never going to be the same thing. And I think that if I'm an astronomer and I'm studying some distant galaxy, my data is very exact. And that's not the problem. The problem is that we use the same word for sentiment data collected on Facebook. So we use this culturally, we see those two things as the same. And they are not the same at all, because in one case, there's been hundreds of years of science and work to try to get this thing as close to reality as the other. And in the other case, there is only marketing bullshit that fills that space. And so we have this tremendous challenge, right? That when we think about election data or census data, and we try to put them alongside cosmic background radiation measurements, those are not the same thing. And I argue in the book that we need to mess with the definition of data. And I think like even more drastically than what I was considering, it would be like way more useful if we had two different words for those things, because they're not the same. And a huge amount of the problem comes from the benefit that the word data conveys, right? It's like the word data carries a lot of authority. And so when I say I collect data, oh, you're collecting data. Oh, that's interesting, right? Whereas like the map from one side of what that means to the other is just like the expanse of the world. There's so much space in between it. And so, that's part of what I argue in the book, is that we as data citizens sort of need to learn to discriminate between these different existences.
Such a good answer. And it just reminds me, just speaking of engineering, how much this book would benefit folks starting out in engineering and coding and computing. So many young people so interested in these fields. And just as you say, Jer, it confers an automatic authority to say, oh, I collect data. Oh,
Yeah.
Well, now I'm quite obedient to the sort of like white lab coat, sort of clinician in the room. And you've just willingly, so openly said, these things are not the same. The artist is at play. What is not here? I mean, there's just such a kind of commitment to that humanist impulse of like, what is the local in particular? So I encourage you all to buy it. It is so accessibly done. Well done, Jer. Congratulations.
Thanks. Can I actually I just want to end with what I wanted to start with, which is the land acknowledgement, which is that as I'm sitting here, I'm on the ancestral lands of the Lenape and Canarsie people, and I want to just acknowledge that and my own historical and continuing role in histories of colonial violence. And these are things that I try to keep on my mind as often as I can.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'll hand it back to Hal.
Well, thank you both so much for your time. Sara, for the terrific questions, and Jer, for the book. Congratulations.
Thank you.
and for the audience for the terrific questions. Geez. But before we leave, one last thing that I want to do, since, once I hit exit, we're all gone. I am posting the link to purchase tonight's book one last time in the chat. So please click on it. It'll also be in the follow-up email to this event. So if you miss it.
And actually, this is me trying to obviously get more people to buy my book, but we missed a question about audience. And when I was writing this book, I was really specifically trying to write it for people who maybe aren't in the data world. And so for those of you who are in the data world and have bought a copy, maybe think of somebody who is not in the data world and encourage them to buy a copy, because that's like really the purpose of this whole thing is to get that sort of circle of understanding to grow.
Totally. And we'll have copies at Community Bookstore. So
yeah.
Sara, Jer, thank you so much for tonight. This was totally lovely. Again, Jer, congratulations. Come by the store sometime. We opened up.
I'm so excited to
limited
do that.
shopping. So
and
hopefully more soon.
Neil is asking a question about the recording of the discussion. It'll be accessible online. Yes.
Yes. Give me a couple of days. We have a YouTube channel. Search Community Bookstore Live or go to our website. You can find it. And I will have it up by Friday. So look for it there. And otherwise, everybody have a lovely night. Get vaccinated. See ya.
Thanks.
Good night.